Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to our first podcast episode of 2026. I'm your host, Frances Hayes, and today we're diving into a crucial topic, irrigation as a service, or IaaS, as we call it sometimes. This innovative model represents a paradigm shift as it offers an alternative to the high upfront cost of purchasing and maintaining irrigation equipment, unlocking vital irrigation access for millions of smallholder farmers globally. For many of these farmers, reliable access to water is the single most important factor in moving from subsistence farming to commercial success. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by Erin Anders, Senior Program Manager at the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute. Erin and her team have been working closely with and supporting the very entrepreneurs across the globe who are pioneering and providing this essential irrigation as a service, including those featured in the Institute's recent Founder Stories series. She's here to give us an insider's look at the challenges and the immense potential of this growing movement. So let's get started. Thanks for joining me today, Erin. Could you first provide a high-level overview of irrigation as a service? Tell us what that is and how it's different from traditional approaches to acquiring and operating irrigation equipment.
Sure. Thanks, Francis. So traditionally, if a farmer wants to irrigate, they are treated as an asset buyer. They have to save up, buy a pump, buy pipes, and assume all the risk of ownership. And if that pump breaks, it's their problem. And with irrigation as a service, it flips this model. So instead of selling the farmer a pump, the provider sells water or the time the equipment is used to get them access to irrigation. And the farmer pays a fee. It's usually per hour, per acre, per season to have water delivered to their field. And fundamentally, it shifts the capital expenditure and the maintenance risk from the farmer to the service provider. And this moves the farmer from owning a depreciating asset for paying for a utility when they need it.
That's great. So, why go back to the root of this, but why is providing this easier access to water and irrigation for smallholder farmers in the area in which you work so important?
It comes down to risk management for the farmer and their income stability. So for instance, sub-Saharan Africa, where the vast majority of agriculture is rain-fed, farmers are at the mercy of the weather. So irrigation allows them to grow high-value crops during the dry season when prices are highest and supplement their rain-fed crops when an unexpected drought occurs. And that's particularly important in the face of erratic climate that we're seeing currently. However, the traditional model of selling pumps has largely stalled because the barrier to entry is too high. And by removing that barrier, we aren't just improving yields, we're unlocking the dry season as an economic opportunity for rural communities.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying is that currently they can grow a certain amount of crops, mostly during the rainy or more wet seasons. But this could unlock potentially another growing season, which is another opportunity to make an actual income and more profit. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it safeguards them. It can help safeguard them through unexpected droughts in the rainy season where they could potentially lose their entire crop and investment that they've put in the rainy season. So there's, yes, you can add another season for the dry season, which they couldn't actually cultivate during that time before without irrigation, but it also helps in the face of climate change and erratic climate as well.
Great. So adding a little bit more stability to their growing season.
Yeah, 100%.
So you mentioned this a little bit before, but can you expand on some of the key barriers that prevent these smallholder farmers from having access to irrigation, and maybe some examples of irrigation as a service models that you've seen that have overcome these challenges?
Yeah, there's three main barriers, and those are the upfront costs of irrigation, the failure of the irrigation equipment, and then land fragmentation. So, for example, a $200 or $300 pump is often impossible for a smallholder to afford in a lump sum upfront, and irrigation as a service eliminates that upfront cost. Then there's we see a lot of mechanical failure throughout the system, even if the farmer does own the pump. And pumps are often abandoned because a simple seal or a spark plug fails and the farmer lacks the technical skill or money to fix it. And the irrigation as a service model, the provider, the asset owner, is incentivized to keep the machine running because if the water isn't flowing from the pump, they don't get paid. So then we have land fragmentation where farmers have often small scattered plots. So buying a pump for a quarter acre doesn't make financial sense to the farmer, but paying a service provider to bring a portable pump to that plot for a few hours does. And oftentimes farmers will have several plots that are scattered along the landscape, and they're small. So having a portable pump that you can move around just when you need it in the time that you need it makes a lot of sense for farmers.
Great. And that's very different than what we see where I'm sitting in Nebraska, where everything's kind of the same size, a square or a circle, and easy, much more easy to irrigate. So that makes sense that they're kind of working a bit more on mobile solutions to accommodate that for that. So that's great. Um,
For sure.
so let's go back a bit now. Can you talk about when the Institute and others doing work on this started to look into this concept or started to see these entrepreneurs or businesses opening up providing irrigation as a service and why it's so intriguing? Why are we researching this?
So we started looking closely at this when we noticed a disconnect. We noticed that the technology exists. We have efficient solar pumps, reliable petrol pumps, but farmer utilization remained low. So we realized that the hardware wasn't the problem. It was the business model. We saw innovators like AgriWorks, who were in our founder series, starting to experiment with these mobile irrigation services years ago. And we realized that treating irrigation as logistics and service business rather than a retail hardware business was the missing link. And so we just started looking into these providers across the globe, really. And yeah, so that's where we're at. And it's very exciting because it's solving this gap.
In working with your team, I understand that there's a little discussion around the exact definition of irrigation as a service. Can you talk a little bit about the different interpretations of the concept among the researchers and kind of what your broad overarching definition of an irrigation as a service company would be?
Irrigation as a service, it's really a spectrum. On one end, you have the utility model where a provider pipes water directly to the field and measures the volume, kind of like a municipal water company. And then on the other end, you have this rental or sharing model where companies like AgriShare in Uganda, which act almost as like an Uber for irrigation equipment. And here, the service is the access to the machinery itself. There is also a hybrid approach where entrepreneurs use portable pumps to travel from farm to farm. But the common thread is that the farmer pays for the outcome, the water on the crop, rather than the tool. And the farmer does not own the equipment. So that's the common thread and, as you will, a working definition.
And I saw this, we also worked together on this series highlighting the stories of 8 entrepreneurs all over the world that are working in this space. And I think that kind of came up some different ways in which they provide irrigation as a service. You mentioned AgriWorks as one, but what are the common challenges that you've seen founders have in their operations? And what do you think is the most critical element that makes them successful?
Yeah, so we looked at founders like Osman Kalindi of Pump Tech in Ghana and Paul Zaki of AgriShare in Uganda. And really, what I see is the common challenge is logistics. Moving equipment between fragmented farms, as we discussed previously, is expensive and time consuming. And the most critical element for success of irrigation as a service is the utilization capability. So, for instance, as an irrigation as a service provider, you're asset heavy. You own the pumps. If the pumps sit idle, the business fails. So, successful models are those that can maximize the hours of pumping that the pump is running in a day. So this brings me to a crucial insight regarding repair shops. These asset owners need to keep the pumps up and running. So we see that the entrepreneurs who succeed often have an integrated maintenance into their model. So yeah, logistics and maintenance, I think, would be the two most common challenges that I see.
And so, can you give us an example of how an irrigation as a service provider might structure its service offerings if you want to just pull out one of the entrepreneurs that you worked with? But, um, are there different tiers or pricing levels depending on how much the farmer can afford typically, or is it kind of a flat rate for everyone?
It varies by context, really, Francis. Some businesses like AgriWorks have used a time booking model where farmers pay for time blocks in a day. Others use a daily fee or a seasonal subscription model. But what is key is that affordability is ensured by matching the payments to the farmer's cash flow. So instead of needing $300 in January before planting, the farmer pays small amounts throughout the season or sometimes even at harvest. And this aligns the cost with the farmer's revenue generation. And that's really, really key for the way that they structure their businesses.
And what role does technology play in making this service cost effective and efficient? I know some of our entrepreneurs use like solar power and things like that, but we've talked a lot too about payment. Are there like mobile payment systems? Talk a little bit about how technology plays a role.
Okay, yeah, that's actually huge. So technology really helps to facilitate trust and efficiency in various aspects of the business, from collecting payment to understanding the asset utilization. So, number one, mobile money in these contexts is non-negotiable. 100%. It lowers the cost of collecting small payments for the businesses and is what farmers typically use for their day-to-day transactions. So this is the first, and it's non-negotiable. Then for companies like Enos Ag, who produce solar pumps, the ability to monitor the pump performance remotely means that they can predict maintenance needs before the breakdown occurs, and maybe increase water use efficiency. And then platforms like AgriShare use digital apps to aggregate demand. So the pump doesn't have to travel 10 kilometers for just one customer. So it serves as a cluster of fields or customers. But crucially, there is a need for further technological advancements, and those advancements need to be in asset tracking. Specifically, there's a critical demand for small tracking devices for pumps and hoses that fit the smallholder context. These are totally necessary to give asset owners the visibility and control they need so that they can maximize the utility and operate their equipment with assurance. This is one of the main things that we're seeing is missing and is a barrier to scaling some of these businesses.
So I think what you just said might come as a bit of a surprise to our listeners because I think when we talk about smallholder farming and irrigation, we don't always think about it with technology and mobile payment and all these things that are relatively new technologies. But I think There's just such an opportunity there to integrate those at the same time um, with these solutions.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
and then beyond just providing the water to the crops during irrigation, what do you think are some of the broader like economic and social impacts of the service on the communities as a whole, especially when it comes to yields, income, access to everyone? Talk a little bit about that.
Ah, yeah. So I think the ripple effects of having irrigation in a community, in these communities we work in, is pretty profound. So when farmers can irrigate, they inherently will employ more labor during the dry season. And before irrigation was there, there wasn't this need for labor. So that helps stabilize wages within the community more broadly across the year, right? But specifically, irrigation as a service creates a secondary economy and like a secondary ecosystem, if you will, like the irrigation ecosystem. It supports local repair shops. I've spent a lot of time analyzing small engine repair shops in places like Rwanda and Ghana, and those shops become hubs of economic activity when irrigation as a service is present. For instance, they're selling parts, they offered skilled labor, they keep the machinery of the rural economy moving. And it's not just about the crop, it's about the entire support system around the equipment. So, and then there's nutritional value associated with irrigated crops. Most of them are horticultural crops. So you're talking about fruits and veggies beyond the rain-fed grain crops. And so it increases a nutritional aspect within the communities as well. So it's multifaceted.
Yeah, so you're really affecting the whole community when you're providing this access to water, which is fantastic. Um, so from a bigger picture, um, and looking at governments and NGOs and investors, what are the kinds of financial policy or institutional support necessary to help these service providers grow and expand to reach more smallholder farmers to make bigger differences in communities across different regions?
We're researching that at the moment, but just from my gut, and I don't have all the answers. I can't say 100% unequivocally, but I think that investors need to provide some sort of working capital or that's not just seed funding. So irrigation as service providers have high operational costs, fuel, labor, repairs, even before they collect revenue. And perhaps governments need to recognize irrigation as a service as a distinct category from equipment retail, because right now it's more about getting pumps in the hands of farmers through the farmers purchasing them, whether it be through a subsidy or creative financing. But potentially they could offer tax incentives for service providers similar to those of utility companies. And then institutional support for technical training. We see that I talked previously about the small engine repair shops who are great with the petrol and diesel pumps, but then we have this wonderful technology of solar pumps, and we need to upscale the informal sector so that they can fully support the full spectrum of pumps, specifically solar technicians, because solar pumps are not cheap. And if they break down, it's very difficult to find a technician who has the capability to fix it effectively.
So looking forward, what do you think needs to happen for this concept to move from a niche solution, as I assume it is, but maybe it's more widespread than I'm imagining, but to move from just a smaller group of entrepreneurs providing this irrigation as a service to more of a mainstream practice globally?
Ah, yeah. So we're currently researching this, but we need to prove that the unit economics at scale. So right now we have successful pilots and growing startups. So in my mind, to go mainstream, we need to standardize. We need some sort of standardization in the service contracts and perhaps, I don't know, maybe a franchise model where local entrepreneurs can easily spin up an irrigation as a service business by using, I don't know, shall we say a business in a box framework? So the demand from farmers we know is there definitely 100%, but the delivery mechanism somehow needs to be streamlined, and that is definitely the current topic of our research in our lab. So yeah, more to come on that.
Great. That franchise option is just really interesting because you could replicate that from various companies that are successful and then provide an easy avenue for other entrepreneurs to get into the same business. So,
Yeah, I think in this research context, or where we're looking into this in the global south, it's not as streamlined as one would think. So these models, the business models, whether it's a franchise model, whatever the business model is, needs to be context specific, and that's where I think the challenge is for research is the contexts are they vary so differently. So understanding the context and making the solution fit, and it's never going to be a one-off solution. There'll be various variations, if you will, of this business in a box to fit the different contexts. So it's quite multifaceted and complex. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll keep us posted as your research moves along as
Yeah.
to what some of those
Yeah.
options might be. So last year, around this time, Water for Food brought together, and your team brought together 8 founders from 7 different countries in Uganda, which I think was the largest ever gathering of companies dedicated to this irrigation as a service model. Um, why do you think the Institute is in this unique position to study this concept? And why do these entrepreneurs want to work with us as an institute? Opening up the specifics about your business can be tricky, I think, for um, these entrepreneurs, especially when you're bringing together companies that are somewhat in competition. So, talk a little bit about that.
I think DWFI is quite unique in that we sit at the intersection of water, food, and entrepreneurship. And bringing together these companies, the 8 founders in Uganda last year, we didn't just host a workshop. We came at it from building a community of practice, and it was a co-creation, participatory event where everyone was there to work on what they're passionate about together. Each one of our founders, as I'm sure you noticed in the series, is very passionate about what they do. So DWFI is uniquely positioned to combine the rigorous research with the real world grit of founders like Abraham, Osman, Karen, Paul. And we can bridge the gap between the academic theory and the muddy reality of the field. So I think that's why it works.
Right. And I can tell by how you talk about it that you're passionate about this research and supporting them. So I think it's people like you too that, really want to see them succeed and learn from them. And yeah, form this community of practice where you're kind of feeding off each other's ideas and learning, rather than more of a we're going to tell you how you should do it mentality.
We're 100% bottom up approach. We learn from them and bring it all together so that it works. And it's fantastic.
Great. Well, are there lessons that you learn from these entrepreneurs or the irrigation as a service model in general that you think can translate to larger scale agriculture or apply to producers in Nebraska or the US?
So I think there's more than one way to do things always. I think working with farmers who have limited resources, you learn how to solve problems with very limited resources inherently. And in doing so, you learn more about the actual problem. I think oftentimes in industrialized agriculture, like we see in the United States, we go straight for a technology, the new and shiny product, a one-size-fits-all solution. Whereas when you have limited resources, you're forced to become a bit more creative. And I think in doing so, you learn more about the problem. And oftentimes that solution is a bit more simple and less expensive than maybe the new shiny technology. So I think there's a lot of cross-learning that can be done between those two different populations of farmers. And it's exciting.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me always when you have farmers of such different contexts and areas and crops. I always feel like there are still lessons to be learned both ways. So thank
Always,
you.
always in farming. It's never the same day twice, ever.
Yeah. Well, I think I could talk for hours about this topic, but I'm going to stop there. It's been fantastic to talk with you, Erin. I guess I'll mention to our listeners too that Erin is out of Uganda currently. So appreciate her making the time kind of outside normal working hours. It's getting into the evening. So I just appreciate your willingness to jump on with me today. And hopefully this provides a little bit of an overview about the Institute's work as irrigation as a service. And we will link to the Entrepreneur series in the show notes so everyone can check that out. And I'm sure there will be lots more research to come as you continue this work. So thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you, Frances.
That concludes this episode of the Water for Food podcast. Join us next time for another insightful conversation on the critical issues of water and food security.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.